So when Tucker says bringing in new people changes the nature of a country's political and cultural identity, he's making the same arguments that the Democratic...
Why is his defense of everything just to be like, well, they do it too? Well, I'll just have you know that, anti-immigration sentiment was very popular amongst the left in 2005, and you have to understand, like, you're not addressing the direct head-on thing that Tucker Carlson is advocating for. A debunked conspiracy theory, by the way, with incredibly racist overtones. You're just trying to say, well, Democrats have said similar things in other times, and no one bats an eye, as if that it justifies anything that Tucker Carlson does. I don't know if you saw the viral videos over the weekend. Glenn Greenwald was all over the place because apparently he's finally answered the Tucker Carlson question to his face.
System update here on our...
That's not the question. I gotta skip to it.
Imagine someone saying, I agree with you on so many issues. Your tax policy is fantastic. I agree with you on gay marriage and feminism, etc., etc. But I personally believe that the white race is superior, and our laws would reflect that. And you say, I'd say certain kind of disagreement is so significant that you regard that person as an adversary and not an ally, especially when the disagreement is found in an area where that person is exerting the greatest influence, or a certain idea they have can become so pernicious that it outweighs agreement on other issues. So my question for you is, how does that square with your praise for right-wing populists, particularly Tucker Carlson, as brave, anti-establishment, anti-war, even calling him a socialist, while overlooking the ideas where the likes of Tucker exert the greatest influence, namely mainstreaming alt-right talking points, particularly the Great Replacement theory?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure I've actually praised Tucker before, certainly not in the terms, those glowing terms that you just referenced. I don't think that was a quote you were reading of mine, probably like meant to be a paraphrase of what you think my sentiments are. I've always said in the past that my reason for going on Tucker's show is very simple, which is I would go on pretty much any show.
Sure.
Because I think it's an obligation that you have if you believe that you have ideas that society would benefit from hearing, to go and speak to those audiences. I would go on Rachel Maddow's.
Sure, because Rachel Maddow is very, very famous. But I think there is going to be the limits to this. First off, he has praised Tucker Carlson. I mean, this is going to be subjective. Where do you define what is considered praise and what is considered speaking about someone in good nature? I'll play some of those clips, but you wouldn't go on, say, if they had a huge platform like Richard Spencer's show, right? You wouldn't do that. You wouldn't go on David Duke's show, even if they had, say, like hundreds of thousands of viewers, without coming on there to be like, by the way, y'all are racist, right? Like, just because Tucker's mainstream and he dog whistles so much stuff, I mean, I can't genuinely believe that Glenn Greenwald is completely unaware. Especially considering, like, I consider him still to be very, very intelligent. I know a lot of people in this whole Glenn Greenwald is like a neocon now kind of heel turn. I still think he's very astute. I have to think that he's most likely doing this intentionally.
Show tomorrow if she called, or Joy Reid's show, or Chris Hayes'. I always used to when they invited me, even when I was harsh critics of them, and I would do so tomorrow. So my going on a show doesn't signify anything other than the fact that I believe that that person has an audience that's worth talking to.
Sure.
And, I think I've gotten a lot of benefits from going on that show. I was able throughout 2020 to do something which was extremely important to me, which was advocate for a pardon for my source and one of my best friends in the world, Edward Snowden, as well as the person I think is one of the most important journalistic pioneers.
Yeah, we saw Noreen.
In the world, Julian Assange, was able to make that case directly to the person who had the power to pardon him. Those are not small causes. No one else was making that cause other than Tucker's show. I think it would have been incredibly, grotesquely irresponsible had I not availed myself of that opportunity.
Sure.
But as far as,
Peter Thiel is his boss now. I think Peter Thiel's going to be my boss soon, too. I'm excited. The Federal Aviation Administration accidentally provided Insider with internal flight records for Jeffrey Epstein's private jets, revealing more than 704 previously unknown flights. Oh, shit. Do we got new names? In March 2020, however, the FAA denied our request, saying that the responsive records originate from an investigative file and was therefore exempt from disclosure. Oh no. The agency cited Exemption 7A, which Congress designated to shield records were compiled for law enforcement, could reasonably be expected to interfere with enforcement proceedings. The FAA did not specify which enforcement proceedings the records might interfere with. Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's ex-girlfriend and confidant, faces a trial over sex trafficking charges this month. But despite its original denial, the FAA inadvertently mailed Insider a portion of Epstein's flight records alongside correspondence for an unrelated FOI request earlier this year. The records contain data on 2,300 flights amongst 4 private jets registered to Epstein between 1998 and 2020. Fuck. Most of them appeared in Insider's searchable database of all known flights in connection to Epstein. Epstein's own Gulfstream 2, which was sold before his arrest. The Boeing 727. Like, who could buy the Lolita Express and, like, even if you renamed it, ever want to be in that thing? Like, it's a portable fucking child trafficking device. The notoriously ferried notable passengers and girls around the globe, according to flight manifest and sealed in the defamation case against Maxwell. Travelers on Epstein's plane included public figures from President Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, we know all those ones, Naomi Campbell, and the astronaut John Glenn. Not to mention Richard Dawkins, Steven Pinker. You're in the flight records. It's not great. But I would like to see new names.
As far as the critiques that you voice of Tucker, I probably don't agree with a lot of them, and some of them I do, and we can talk about that. But in 2018, when I was still at The Intercept, Jeremy Scahill was the host and still is of a popular podcast called Intercepted. Mm-hmm. And he was going away on vacation and asked me to co-host the show and said I could have on anyone I wanted, and I invited Tucker Carlson on as my guest. And I think we talked for about 45 minutes, the first half or so of which was about Russiagate, where we had a lot of agreement. Obviously, we were both skeptics of Russiagate from the start.
Yeah.
And the entire second half of the interview, of the discussion, was nothing other than my confronting him with criticisms that are frequently voiced by others. And I told him the ones that I selected were ones that I shared, about the ways in which he often talks about marginalized groups or talks about news stories in a way that is gratuitously inflammatory and can even stimulate dangerous impulses in people. Mm-hmm. And he was very receptive. We had the kind of conversation that you and I are having. I posted the transcript of that part of the conversation on the internet where anyone can find it on Medium, so that people can see. So I had him on my show, and I was allowed to, what was essentially my show that day, and I was able to pick the topics that I wanted to talk about, and half the show was devoted to my critique.
Half the show was dedicated to my critique of him. Okay. Glenn Greenwald, excerpts of my discussion with Tucker Carlson. Glenn highlighted too, thank you. There's a lot of criticism of you that I think is very partisan in nature, very ideological in nature, stuff that comes from Media Matters and the like that is boring and worthless and worth ignoring. And then there's some criticism of you, what you do on your show, and I think that it's at least legitimate and valid enough to discuss. Wow. Even the framing of this is ridiculous. And I wanted to ask you just a couple of those lines of critique. Tucker Carlson, sure. Thanks for the highlighting, Glenn. We can just read it ourselves. One of which is the way in which you cover crime, domestic crime in the United States, is extremely selective and designed to advance an agenda as opposed to giving a realistic depiction of what the nature of violence in the United States is. And I wanted to ask you about a couple of areas, the first of which is police abuse. Last week, there were 2 really talked about cases involving police violence. One was there's a police officer in Bald Springs, Texas. His name is Ray Oliver. He's a white officer who was indicted for the fatal shooting of a black teenager, Jordan Edwards. News of that indictment broke July 15th, the same day that the fatal shooting took place in Minneapolis, where a Somali-American police officer shot a white Australian woman. You covered the Minneapolis shooting, I think, on at least several occasions, including you emphasizing that the police officer was an immigrant from Somalia, and you asked, Tucker Carlson interrupts, well, there's a lot going on in the story, a lot we don't know. Mohammed Noor was an immigrant from Somalia. Is that a relevant fact? We don't know. But it's been treated as one by many news organizations. How do you know that? Because they're not reporting it. Glenn. But you didn't talk about the indictment of this white police officer. Now, I realize, I get criticized for selective coverage, and as one person with one show, you can only cover certain things. You have only an hour to each night, but you're necessarily going to leave out a newsworthy story. But do you think it's at least a valid point that in choosing which stories to cover, that it's important not to flame tensions against particular groups of people, especially given the impact of the platform you have? Wait, where's the response? Are we just jumping to the next part? Okay, either you've cut this out and we're jumping to the next part and you're not publishing the response, which is hella sus, or you, this is a puff piece on yourself, written by yourself, I know, but including the transcripts and then highlighting things that you think vindicate you while not giving us what his response is and then what did you say to his response, which is the crucial part that you, again, are leaving out here. Jumping ahead, how does this indictment shed light on that concern? I mean, this is a guy who came to the US as a kid. By all accounts, he's been law-abiding his whole life. He became a police officer. I mean, don't you see why there's a view that the reason this case is of interest to Fox News audiences because of how inflammatory it is? It's the Somali-American immigrant cop shooting a white woman who's Australian, whereas the majority of controversies involving police abuse are white officers shooting black people under suspicious circumstances. And so, if you focus so much on the former and give a little attention to the latter, this concern arises that you're using your platform to fuel resentment against people who are more vulnerable and marginalized. Right. I hope that I've been clear on my show and other shows that I had. I am worried about the behavior of police. I've defended body cam requirements for all cops for that reason. I don't like the abuse of power, and I think that some police officers engage in it, and I think they too often get a pass from conservatives. And I've said that. I continue to think for it. For whatever it's worth, I've been hassled twice in a big way by the police, and I know that it happens, and I don't like it. But they weren't hassling you because you were white. There's a very big difference. Second point I would make is that I don't really want to do anything to inflame racial tensions. And so, that's certainly unintentional. I don't like that I'm worried about racial tensions in the United States. I'm worried about tribalism, and so I don't want to be part of all that. I really kind of... Wow. This is shocking that you think... This, in many ways, is like letting him scurry away from things that he genuinely does that are damaging by now downplaying it and being like, hey, come on, I am for body cams, I am against police corruption. I mean, fucking everyone is. I would think no one likes corruption, especially when it's state-funded corruption. Like, holy fuck. Peter Bernard wrote an article about how your show that I largely agree with, which he said, even though he disagrees with you on a lot, I forget the exact terminology, but he said your show is kind of what conservative cable news could be if it's intellectually engaging. Oh my god, this is the call out from Glenn Greenwald that he wants to show and put on blast. And he talks about how you advocate positions that are even too dovish for mainstream Democrats, including telling Ralph Peters that you even know for certain that Iran is an actual domestic threat to the U.S. Oh, you don't know for certain that Iran is an actual domestic threat to the U.S., which is something that I would never ever hear any mainstream Democratic politician say. I agree with the praise that he had for your show. But you had this segment a couple of weeks ago, again, this part highlighted, not the initial praise, saying that conservative cable news would be if it's intellectually engaging. He spreads the white replacement theory, the great replacement theory. He says that it's going to change voting demographics in the U.S. if we continue to allow immigrants in. He always talks about how it's going to change Judeo-Christian Western values if we let in all these people from outside. It's going to literally change. It's the reason David Duke and other white supremacists say that he gets all their talking points right on mainstream television. How are you going to skip over that? This is the end of this, by the way. But you had a segment on a couple weeks ago that I do think highlights the validity of this critique that I was asking you about. And I have to say, this one bothered me the most, about this friction that you said took place or was emerging between residents of California, Pennsylvania, with this tiny little town of 6,000 people, with this ethnic Roma population that had Romanians seeking asylum in the US. And I think there was a grand total of 36 of them. And this segment kind of played into all these negative stereotypes about the Roma, who are the ones marginalized and hated, who are one of the most marginalized and hated groups on the planet. Tucker Carlson. Roma are seeking asylum, saying they suffered racism in their native Romania. Immigration is not going well, according to the residents. The Roma have little regard either for the law or public decency. Citizens say they defecate in public, chop their heads off chickens, leave trash everywhere, and more. They're upset, some of them, anywhere. George Eli is a filmmaker who... Are you not going to stop and correct any of that? Well, again, this is the puff piece. This is the fucking puff piece. This is the piece that Glenn Greenwald says defends him against criticism that he's never called Tucker Carlson out on the shit. It's this tiny little conflict that, I don't know, didn't seem to have any repercussions for me, and had little effect on, I think, your audience, other than the kind of to inflame tensions with the Roma. I'm just wondering why, with a platform as significant as yours, given the conflicts that are so important in the world to cover, you do cover this, because I do have to say, it looks a lot like pandering to the Fox audience when you do stuff like that. I'm just interested in, and moving on, and that's the fucking sum totality of his evidence. First off, lying to your face that this was almost half of his podcast, unless his podcasts are 10 minutes. Secondly, you're clearly through the use of your highlighting here, trying to get everyone to be like, oh yeah, no, you called out Tucker. It's now totally cool for you to do 11 appearances a year on his White Power Hour and never bring up any of these things. Because you've already done that. You're just on there to spread messaging. To be a useful pawn.
Critiques of him.
Okay.
What I find unfair is the idea that I'm supposed to go on his show where the way cable works is someone calls you up, right? And they say, hey, we'd like you to come on and talk about this topic.
Sure.
And then you can either say, no, I don't want to talk about the topic. I don't know much about it. I'm not interested in it. I just don't have anything to say, which I sometimes do.
Right.
Or you say, okay, yeah, I'll come on and talk about the topic.
Okay.
Now, you could
It's book sales. That's what it essentially is.
Clean
It's
up your room.
it's like it's more subs, it's more Patreon, it's more book sales, it's more Substacks, it's more Rumbles. It's just more of that. That's entirely what it is. Speaking of which, now that I am still independently funded, Hunter Biden's crack. Thank you very much for subscribing with Prime. I sincerely appreciate that. Thank you.
could go on and just like go back on your word, right? And like pretend that you're going on to talk about the topic you've agreed to talk about, but instead just be like, hey, Tucker, I'm here to talk about like your whatever, your racism or this or that. Just like,
You could weave it in, or you could use the opportunity if he's talking about things that you vehemently disagree with. If he's like, well, what do you have to think about this? I mean, blah, 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 and they're changing immigration rates or blah, blah, blah. You can then use that as an opportunity as a jumping off point to be like, well, Tucker, I got to say, I disagree with the statement you just made because it's racist. But about my book, that deal's coming along, right?
you and I had an agreement about what we were going to talk about, a broad agreement, like your critiques of my journalism. But if you had come on and ignored that and started like, I don't know, attacking me from my personal life or asking me weird questions about my husband or my kids,
Right, yeah.
like I would have felt violated. I would have felt
Of course.
like that's not what we agreed to. I would have cut you off.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So all those years when I was going on CNN and MSNBC, I was a very vocal critic of CNN and MSNBC, but I wouldn't go on and just gratuitously attack them.
We looked up the data, by the way, that study that was done that showed how much he has stopped critiquing Fox and Fox News ever since becoming the darling child of the Tucker Carlson Power Hour. So, I mean, that says something right there as well.
Go on and talk about what we had agreed to talk about, and occasionally it would lead to criticisms of them, but often not.
Sure.
So when I go on Tucker's show, I go on to talk about the things I'm asked to go on and talk about. I'm not really sure. So is your argument that, referring to that quote, that I should regard Tucker as so far over the line of decency that regardless of how else we can interact, what benefits I can get by going on the show, that
yes, what benefits can I get? Like, oh, my sweet benefits. What can I just need a couple more Substack followers. Come on, there's so many benefits.
deemed radioactive and off limit.
Yes,
what's
I
your
do.
argument about that?
I do believe
that
that because he regularly engages in the anti-immigrant sentiment and regularly he has perpetuated the great replacement theory that through immigration and
he hasn't just perpetuated it, he perpetuates it. He does infrequently. It's one of his talking points. Like, I know Glenn's defense is usually like, oh, well, you don't even watch Tucker Carlson, you only watch like clips on Media Matters or whatever and shit like that. Well, we do. Like, we've watched entire 13-minute segments in their entirety, start to finish, listening to every single thing Tucker said, where he vilifies immigrants and people who aren't Christian, Western, Judeo-Christian values, good old, the whole thing is a whole bunch of dog whistles. But dog whistles aside, if you add in the element that they're actually replacing our voting demographics, which Tucker Carlson says, he's like, they are arriving here, they're trying to change our demographics, and they are trying to change us into something that we are not. These are white nationalist talking points. These are the exact same thing that you'll have Richard Spencer's and David Duke's and Jared Taylor's saying to their audiences on a regular basis. They won't be as coded or polite, perhaps, it'll be like, well, these filthy brown people are coming over here and they're trying to replace the whites, and we can't stand for this anymore. That's what you're gonna hear Jared Taylor say, but it's the same talking points. This is just on a mainstream, on the fucking, like, I'm so tired of being tricked into believing by people like Glenn Greenwald that this is not important, that everyone is just off their rocker when it comes to Tucker Carlson, and that the left are dominating so many spaces in media. They are not. Tucker Carlson is the most popular program on cable news. And I know that's not new media, but that's still massive. There's still millions and millions of people who watch his show that is incredibly serious. And his messaging, it works. It gets people inflamed. It gets conservatives, especially ones who are now kind of getting into this whole populism thing, really, really angry about this national sentiment that our demographics, our people are being replaced. We need to take our country back. He doesn't have to go as far as saying that this is exclusively white people. I mean, he's going to appeal to a broader demographic now, maybe. A broader demographic that is still going to be xenophobic and vilify every single person that they feel are coming to this country to, like, change it for the worse. It's like, it's very dangerous. And it is so mainstream at this point that at this stage, Glenn Greenwald is effectively operating as someone who is doing this, I don't think, as part of a concerned, like, there's not a plot here, okay? The plot is Glenn Greenwald likes the monies, and he makes more monies when he gets to be on Tucker Carlson's show and not shit on Tucker Carlson for being a white supremacist. So he does that. He gets a whole bunch of new subs, whole bunch of new viewers, whole bunch of new kickbacks, and all of a sudden it's like, well, I'm just on there to talk about this issue that was important to me because I'm a journalist, and this issue is very, very important about how Fauci is literally murdering dogs. That's what I'm here to talk about on the Tucker Carlson Power Hour.
What they call open borders, even though we don't have open borders, that our way of life, he chooses his words very particularly. American life, i.e., white culture, is under threat by the scary brown people from over the border, from over the ocean.
That's not a quote. That's your interpretation of
that. Yes, that's not. It's not just my interpretation either, and it's.
No, but I'm saying that's not a quote that you just attributed to him. That's your.
No, but he has said.
Fast on the draw.
Dirty.
So fast on the draw. I just, for the record, I would like everyone to know that he did not, in fact, say any of the things you said. You're just interpreting that, and I would agree, perhaps in a negative light, and maybe you should pray at the altar of Tucker more often.
He's called people dirty, like that's for sure, and when he does, he's usually talking about sanctuary cities or immigrants that. I
don't know. I don't know who this person is
within the city. For example, that's what I'm talking about. That's why I argue that lending him credence by appearing him on a show and giving him credibility when he doesn't deserve it by perpetuating those abhorrent positions, I think is unconscionable, to be honest.
Yeah, no. So I'm glad you raised that. But I'm definitely going to talk about the specifics of what you understand his beliefs to be. But before I do, let me just ask you to be honest, and you seem like an honest guy, so I trust that you're gonna give me the honest answer.
Sure.
Do you regularly sit down and watch Tucker show? Sit down and watch the monologue, or do you generally see it when
fucking called it? Holy shit! Paint by numbers, Glenn Greenwald.
Clips they believe are incriminating. How is it that you end up getting exposed to his show?
You see, the problem is Tucker is clipped and shipped, I believe is the official term. It's the moniker that is utilized on the internet when a streamer or a content producer, sometimes even a news host like myself, is clipped out of context, and then all of a sudden everyone believes that I am pushing for the horse paste. Someone named the Serfs has done that before, and they are egregious, and they should be stopped.
Usually it's incriminating clips, just to be completely honest, but that's enough to me because the fact— Notice,
and this is fucking important, Glenn isn't responding to any of the stuff he brought up yet, I'll give him time, about either the white supremacy, the great replacement theory, the vilification of immigrants. He is responding to, how did you see this? Did you see that, like little duck and parry that's going on here? Well, I just want to bring this up because, deep state controls media matters. I have no idea what the fuck he's going to say, something. But, yeah, that rather than the content of Tucker's character, what he's actually bringing up for him saying.
The fact that he's the most watched primetime political pundit. And the fact that millions of people see that every day, not just on Twitter, not just on YouTube, but people that actually have cable and regularly watch Tucker. That to me is enough to where he to where I hold those positions against him.
Yeah, that's fair. So the reason I ask that is because I just know this from personal experience. If there is somebody who wants to disparage me or cast me in a bad light, and there are definitely people who devote them a lot of time to doing that, they're probably going to be able to take clips of this particular conversation.
Yeah.
And just kind of take these snippets out of the context in which they took place and create an impression of what our conversation was or what I said that would be much, much different if you actually sat and listened to the conversation from start to finish and understood the full context.
Yeah.
So that's the first point I would make, is that
you're actually pulling it's the context bro shit on Tucker fucking Carlson. On Tucker fucking Carlson, of all people.
Yeah.
People who watch Tucker's show and hear what he says night to night, so often, what Media Matters does, what they're funded to do, right? They're never there to take the clips that make Tucker look good or reasonable or compassionate or humanitarian. They pick the quotes on the segments on purpose, and they clip them on purpose.
They do that sometimes. They also show full segments. I mean, you understand that you just legally can't reproduce someone's entire show without worrying about if that person is then going to throw a lawsuit on you. But they do. If the full segment is up on YouTube, they'll just post a link to the whole segment. Like I said, we have watched the full things before. And the context does not matter when it comes to Tucker Carlson and the Great Replacement Theory. He is consistently using that in his messaging. It's something he's been repeatedly doing. So unless you are ignorant to that fact, or you're intentionally just ignoring it because it doesn't matter to you. Because again, dumanies.
Purpose and frame them on purpose to get you angry, to make you feel like he's a terrible person. That's the organizational mission of Media Matters and Fox, which doesn't mean that what you're seeing is completely false. I'm just saying it's important, I think, to realize that there is a difference between the message you get if you're getting clips of his chosen by people who dislike him and are purposely trying to disparage him versus the relationship that he has with his viewers who watch him every night and hear his full message. That's the first thing.
Sure.
So on the specifics of like the Great Replacement theory and the anti-immigration stuff, let me just say a few things. Because by appearing on, I don't watch Fox News. I don't watch any cable shows.
Sure.
In part because I live in Brazil.
You just admitted to doing the thing you're calling people out for. Well, do you watch his full show? Did you watch all of it? Because I don't. But I'm going to talk about it.
Available, I think I could probably find a way to stream it online if I wanted to, but I don't.
Sure.
But by appearing as much as I do on Fox, you get there 15 minutes early. You hear it in your earpiece. So I hear the show a lot of times from the start. Often, I'm like,
you absolute clown man. Are you serious? That's your justification for all this? Well, I hear it while I wait before I come on Tucker Carlson. So I've got a pretty good understanding of what he's about, okay? He's on the up and up. Let me just say that. It's not all white nationalist stuff. There's barely any N-words. It's actually very pleasant.
On the show once or twice a week.
Yeah.
Things like that. So I feel like I have a good sense for the discourse he's engaging in. First of all, it is interesting, the whole question of immigration, which is that, when I started writing about politics in 2005, the idea of open borders was most vehemently opposed by the left. It was the left that hated open borders. You can go back when George Bush and Dick Cheney were advocating what they were calling immigration reform. The argument from the left, I'm talking about like the real left, like Bernie Sanders, Sherrod Brown, labor union leaders, like Cesar Chavez, was that open borders was a Koch brothers Chamber of Commerce plot to flood the nation with surplus labor in order to bring down wages and hurt the American worker.
Yeah.
You're picking like 3 or 4 isolated examples, but the overwhelming sentiment of that was coming from the libs, not the left. What are you fucking lying about now?
And you can even go back to 2013, so like in the Obama years when Jamil Bowie, who now writes for the New York Times, was at the American Prospect, and he has an article, and you can Google it, called African American Skepticism on Immigration, and his argument was, if you cannot turn the Democratic Party into an open borders party, because African Americans know that the people who are going to be hurt most by increasing immigration are them.
Right.
That it's their jobs that are going to first be given to new arrivals, that their wages are going to suffer, and they've always been. So the whole idea of how immigration is thought about, which is that the left used to always be opposed to it, and now to be opposed to immigration almost is proof that you're like a white.
Oh my god. Oh, wow. I gotta be honest, Glenn, more than anybody, has bought so much credit for me for some of his, like, again, incredible work in the past, that, like, I'm willing to overlook how far this turn is supposed to be. I don't know, maybe, and Glenn is coming to his own defense right now. He's making all these tweets that are like, I never changed, I'm the exact same person I always was, people just don't realize that politics have actually changed, and other shit like me.
Nationalist or racist, like, you can't possibly be in favor of immigration restriction except because you hate the people coming in or believe they're inferior, is a very new way of understanding politics. And even when Bernie ran in 2016, he sat down with Ezra Klein, who was at Vox, and Ezra asked him, "Are you in favor of open borders?" And he looked at Ezra like he was crazy and said, "Open borders? Are you kidding? That's a Koch brothers plot."
Yeah.
That's what Bernie said.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing, is being.
He never said it was a Koch brothers plot. What the fuck? just earlier when you were like talking about whether or not that quote is properly attributed to him. But this is absolutely ridiculous. First, okay, Bernie Sanders was running for the president of the United States. The concept of open borders is a fundamentally unpolitical statement, all right? He's not going to be running for the president of the United States, say, oh, by the way, I'm for free and open borders, and then also hope to be getting any kind of, like, center-right broad coalition votes if they're putting out statements like that. But, Lance, if you listen to the entire context, Bernie totally said it was a Koch brothers plot. True. He was clipped out of context. But I'm sorry. Glenn, you're getting so many ideologies mixed up right now. Yes, it is entirely true that the Democratic Party of the United States has never been for an open borders policy. And as recently as, yes, 2005, there was certainly not mainstream discussion discussing borders. Like, it's always, if you're going to be an open-minded progressive Democrat, then you always put forward the idea that, hey, everybody, we need to have responsible is the key word, responsible immigration policies, ones that, you know, prioritize things like safety, and it's very important. Like, he's finally being grilled on all the fucked up shit Tucker Carlson says, and like, rather than simply defend it, he's kind of dancing around it, saying that Tucker Carlson is clipped out of context. You don't watch his show. He would know because he doesn't watch his show.
Concerned about open borders or the unrestrained flow of people across the border has always been popular on the left. Like, the concern about that is the American worker, and it's never been viewed as kind of like an inherently racist position. Obviously, it can be racist, but it's not inherently. So, and then the point of that, and so I, just to be clear, I have never, ever heard Tucker frame immigration or any other issue in the racist terms that you attributed to him. In fact, he believes that what is racist is liberal discourse, the idea that we should judge people based on their race. His central moral principle, he says, and he says it all the time, like continuously, is that we ought to be a race-blind society, that we should never judge a human being based on immutable characteristics, the color of their skin, things they can't control. That, like, so fundamental to the conception of justice is the idea that individuals should be treated without regard to race. And whenever he talks about, for example, immigration, he makes that same argument that Jamil Bowie makes, that if you have people flooding across the border in an uncontrolled way, the people who are going to be hurt by that are not wealthy elites who wall themselves off in their communities, have gated streets, who send their kids to private school. It falls on the working class, who is not white people, but is a multiracial group of American citizens, all of whom are equal. That's what his real argument is explicitly. Now, you can say there's more sinister subtext, but I just want to be clear that on the level of what he says, it's aggressively race neutral. And then let me just tell you about something about the replacement theory. I'll just give you an analogy that probably a lot of right-wing listeners are not going to love, but this is something I noticed a long time ago. I think I wrote about it once in Salon in 2007, 2008. If you are in the left and you say that you believe that American Jewish voters cast their votes based on what is best, not for the United States, but for Israel, you will be immediately labeled an anti-Semite. You'll be accused of propagating a long-standing anti-Semitic trope that Jews have dual loyalty, that they're not real Americans or real Germans or real British or real French, that they always have loyalty to Israel. That's their first loyalty. But what used to drive me crazy is that a lot of Republican neocons, like Bill Kristol in the Weekly Standard in 2007 and 2008, would write articles overtly arguing that no American Jews should in good conscience vote for the Democratic Party because of how critical they are for Israel, that Republicans are much more supportive of Israel, and therefore American Jews have the obligation to vote for the party that's best for Israel, which is the Republican Party. Obviously, the premise of that argument, when made from the right, which is so totally acceptable, is exactly the same as the one that's prohibited when made from the left, namely that American Jews cast their votes based on what's best for this foreign country. This is the same double standard I'm seeing with the idea of the Great Replacement Theory. When Tucker first talked about the idea that bringing immigrants from certain countries in changed the character, the political character and cultural character of the country, the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, was called for his...
Okay, first off, do not be distracted by the tabs. But these aren't my tabs, everyone. This is the video of the person who's streaming, who's interviewing Tucker Carlson. Got my tabs safely tucked away, so all surprises will be surprises.
Firing. And he immediately pointed out, and it's true, you can go on the ADL website and read it yourself, the ADL formally is opposed to both the one-state solution for Israelis and Palestinians, as well as giving Palestinians the right of return, the idea that Palestinians who were displaced from their land should get to come back and have full voting rights. Because their argument is that if you allow Palestinian citizenship, it will change the character of Israel. It'll mean Israel is no longer a Jewish state. It'll destroy the character of Israel. Exactly the same premise is what people call the Great Replacement Theory, that if you import enough people into a country and make them citizens with voting rights, it changes the character of the country. It's not just the ADL, it's not just the ADLU, it's the Democrat.
Holy shit, Glenn. So is this what he's using to be able to justify what Tucker says by conflating these two things? I hope you bring this up.
Democratic Party, you can find Democratic Party leaders who frequently say, who like as if it's a good thing, which for them it is, hey, look, because of immigration, demographic changes are happening that are going to mean that in 10 to 20 years, we're going to get to win states like Texas and Arizona.
Sure.
Because we're changing the nature of the voting population through immigration. So when Tucker says bringing in new people changes the nature of a country's political and cultural identity, he's making the same arguments that the Democratic...
Why is his defense of everything just to be like, well, they do it too? Well, I'll just have you know that, anti-immigration sentiment was very popular amongst the left in 2005, and you have to understand, like, you're not addressing the direct head-on thing that Tucker Carlson is advocating for. A debunked conspiracy theory, by the way, with incredibly racist overtones. You're just trying to say, well, Democrats have said similar things in other times, and no one bats an eye, as if that it justifies anything that Tucker Carlson does.
Party and the ADL make just from the other side.
Sure.
And I'm not really sure why one is permissible and one isn't.
I think that the thing is,
they're not on trial here. Tucker Carlson is. That's the question I was posed to you. Like, doing whataboutism to every single answer is not an actual response. These are logical fallacies, Clem.
When he says it, what his base here is, oh, well, foreigners are going to come in and take over the country, and we're no longer going to be a free... capitalist country with liberty, and it's going to be filled with all these woke immigrants, and I guess the biggest thing is like when he that's basically what he perpetuates is like it's what his audience hears, is what his base hears, because like one of the biggest issues when it comes to the discourse is that we all perceive what someone says entirely differently, and so when because you saw examples when Tucker was perpetuating these talking points about foreigners coming in and taking American jobs, his audience, people interviewed them, or they saw like comments on videos and whatnot, and it basically reflects exactly the sentiment that white nationalists have said with the Great Replacement, that there's this central plot, like the Jewish question, to replace white people and basically incorporate what is essentially the white genocide, according to them.
Do you think Tucker favors the deportation or
Yes.
citizenship of Black and Hispanic Americans?
I'm gonna say that was just like the fastest yes ever before the sentence had even finished. Yes. You should get Glenn on your show. So he won't do it now, but back in the day, I actually had an offer from Glenn Greenwald before they really knew who they was. He was doing some like it was some press tour for something that he was shilling, and I just got a random email being like, hey, by the way, Lance, we're one of the organizers on the behalf of Glenn Greenwald. We were wondering if the Serfs would be interested in interviewing him, and I was just like, yes, could not slam the keyboard fast enough. And then, I suppose, because the handlers do a bit of research, they probably YouTubed a couple of my Glenn Greenwald segments, realized that I've been just thoroughly disgusted and disappointed by him as of late, and they canceled on me. And then they offered to replace him with Ben of Ben & Jerry's. I don't know why. Maybe it's the same like firm that handles these accounts. But then I never heard back, because I was also like, yeah, actually, I'd love to speak to Ben, because apparently Ben & Jerry's is pretty based. But yeah.
I mean, I couldn't say...
Has he ever advocated that or said anything remotely close to that? That he, like 13% of the population are Black Americans. Another, I don't know what the exact number is, they call it 15-20% are Hispanics, could be even higher.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard him saying we need to deport them or strip them of their citizenship so that we can have a white nationalist country?
No, that's...
I've never heard Tucker say the N-word on his show on Fox. I've never heard him say the N-word. So I mean, pretty much case closed there. Pretty much, I don't see anything racist about him. Hasn't ever said the N-word. And that's pretty much the barometer, right? Like, we can set that, and then once you said the N-word, you're racist. But until then, pretty much
that's the thing too. It's all about how you frame your arguments. It's all about the language that you use. Because if you
But have you heard him say anything that would even?
I don't have an example.
Supports that.
No, I don't have an example.
But that's kind of important, right? Because like the idea that that immigrants will take people's jobs, it's a fact.
Boom. Oh, you've just been debate broed. Yeah. Well, this is the crucial thing, see, because you can't give me this one specific example. I mean, that's too bad. I would have, if I was this person interviewing him, I would have written down, because it's, I mean, you could have just gone on Google. You can go on Google and pull up a whole bunch of the whole host of Tucker Carlson, like, super clips, and make Glenn Greenwald watch some of them.
Fact. I mean, immigrants do come in and lower wages for the American worker. And that, as I said, is a longstanding concern on the part of labor unions in the American left.
Sure.
And also the American right. And when you say, I'm concerned that new people are going to come in and take away jobs from Americans and lower their wages, what you're talking about, again, is not rich Americans. You know, they don't come in and steal jobs from, like, physicists and cable hosts and journalists. Well, what you're talking about is the working class, which is largely a multiracial working class. Like, when you're defending the working class and their wages and their jobs, you're defending huge numbers of Black and Hispanic Americans along with white working class Americans.
Well, overall, I
Judeo-Christian, Western values. He keeps saying the same things over and over. He's very deliberate with his tactics, what he uses. He says those things specifically. Do you think he wants the Muslims? To come in? And by the way, the loss of jobs, and this is the infuriating part, because Glenn is pretty much just perpetuating the same stereotypes himself right now. The loss of jobs, in large part, has to do with automation. It's not immigrants coming to, like, that is old-timey shit. No one believes that anymore. Like, at least no one who isn't trying to perpetuate and stoke fears in the American people for their own nefarious purposes. But, like, oh man, how far you've fallen, Glenn. You're kind of jumping the line from, like, useful idiot to, like, directly on board with the train.
I do believe that immigration is a good thing because, like it or not, the reality is that there are a lot of
I thought it was an automation, but outsourcing, it's a combination. It used to be outsourcing. Outsourcing was a really big thing during, like, the early thralls of, like, you know, the grand expansion of neoliberalism in the 1980s, for example, during the Reagan and Thatcher era. And anywhere that labor is cheaper, of course, you're going to, if you're a multinational corporation, it'll save you a lot of money to get things manufactured in areas where the labor is cheaper and the safety of the workers is less stringent. So yes, that is something that absolutely does happen. But also automation has taken up huge swaths of American working class sector jobs. You know, people that used to have line and factory work, once it's replaced by automation, what exactly happens in that case? But rather than look at the deep fundamental flaws, which this can really explain to you why Tucker Carlson is anything but a leftist, is further far away, is you're not looking at the actual economic system and how prioritizing quarterlies and profits at the end of every cycle is suddenly going to drive people to find the cheapest ways to manufacture goods for the most amount of profit. You don't talk about that. You don't talk about the relationship between workers and their employers, any of that kind of stuff. You talk about immigrants, and you talk about immigrants in this faux class consciousness. Like, this is exactly what it is. Populism, faux class consciousness, telling your listeners, telling everyone who's watching you, by the way, we are all united because we are all in the same class as workers, and at the end of the day, who's really going to be hurt by rising immigration are you, the workers, and you, the black workers, and you, the Hispanic workers, and you, the indigenous workers. I speak to all of you, I do, says Glenn Greenwald. He's the Lorax of the class worker, right? And now all of a sudden he's going to speak for all of them when he's not bringing up the actual thing that is affecting their jobs and why their jobs might be shitty.
Jobs, especially within the agricultural sector, that are
false
low,
consciousness.
Like,
thank you.
They're so low paying that they're usually taken by migrants or immigrants, and they're just paid under the table, and that's
do you think
just
that's good, or I mean, isn't it better to just have better enforcement of, you know, to make these companies pay decent living wages so that Americans will be able to take those jobs?
Sure, I completely agree, but I don't think that like, either way, the immigration reform is completely the. I'm not going to pretend to be like an expert. I'm just some political nerd, honestly, but overall, yes, like a wage increase and a limit on the outsourcing of jobs, I believe is crucial for a stronger working class. But I don't believe in, like, closing off the border. And
Can you do a 60-second pause to explain what the Lorax means? Cano class? I can. Yes. Because much like a classroom, you see, I don't mind interrupting the flow of things to answer a question if the question delights me. If the question doesn't delight me, most likely I'll just be a prick and either ignore it or I'll put the person on blast. Because sometimes that can be fun too. But anyways, yeah, The Lorax is the children's book by Dr. Seuss, and in the story, I forget exactly how it rhymes, but it's kind of verbatim. Sorry, it's not going to be verbatim, but it's a story about how these incredible trees that are cut down and used for profit because they make the Lorax trees, the Snuffleupagus trees. Fuck, it's been a while. I've literally got the book behind me. I should really read up on it. It was one of my favorite children's books. But anyways, how these trees are being cut down to produce things, commodities, things that everyone wants to buy. And the more these trees get cut down, the more valuable they become by virtue of the fact that there's less of them until there's almost truffula trees. Until there's almost no truffula trees. And truffula trees can make things that everyone needs. They essentially harvest the truffula trees and turn the world into this dystopian future, save for one seed, one final seed, and the seed is being held by this person. Now, when the truffula trees are around, the Lorax appears, and the Lorax speaks for the trees. In essence, the Lorax is the one who's running around saying, everybody, capitalism is going to kill us all. Everyone, if we don't do something, capitalism is going to kill us all. That's what the Lorax is doing. Because the trees can't speak. They're just trees. They're fucking trees. That's all they are. At the end, you are the POVs, you are the listener of the story, the young boy becomes you, and you've heard the message, and what are you going to do with the final seed? You know, it's kind of like climate change, that kind of stuff. But anyways, the Lorax is the advocate. That's what Glenn Greenwald is doing right now for all the immigrants.
I don't believe...
And yes, I guess Arm the Lorax is what everyone is saying. Do I have to even add in Roblox? It's a fictional character in a fictional universe written by Dr. Seuss. Arm the Lorax.
I vehemently opposed Trump's policies, and I oppose Biden's policies at the border right now. I think it's...
No?
I think it's too rigid, and the fear... There's just a lot of fear-mongering on the conservative right that is...
I didn't know about this. So the logging industry has made an anti-Lorax book called The True Axe. I already guarantee you it's going to be like, well, we actually need to make these things because otherwise we wouldn't have houses. You don't want to live underground. Ooh, all right, I'll read this for fun time at some point. That's absolutely hilarious.
Is mucking up discourse. Some even claiming that we have open borders right now, and that which is completely ridiculous.
Well, let me ask you about that, because this is
Sure.
actually something I'm very interested in. So, you made your case against Tucker, and I think a lot of people share your views. I said what I understand him to be arguing, and
Right.
for me, he's not so over the line that he's some kind of untouchable.
Yeah.
And by the way, I also don't think that by going on his show, I'm doing him a favor. I think his show would thrive without
Sure.
me.
Yeah,
there was
of course.
a year when I didn't go on because I was so occupied with my Brazil exposés in 2019 and 2020. He did just fine without me. I feel like I use his platform more than I give it something. And I don't I think he's gonna thrive whether I go on or not.
Yeah.
But what you were just saying is true, right? That we don't have open borders. Biden's immigration policies are very, very similar to Trump's in a lot of ways.
They are.
Obama deported more Americans.
Yes, he did. That's all true. You can shit on the Democrats and not be the spokesman for a white nationalist, not be the PR firm for a white nationalist. You can do both. You can it's totally possible, Glenn.
Thanks for the explanation. Less than 3 all your comrades.
Hey, thank you, Kano Class, for the tier 1. Appreciate you. And the Lorax is pretty based. It's a very good book. But yeah, I think this is pretty much the end of him talking about Tucker.
Most disgusting things I saw was during one of the debates. It's one of the final debates of the Democratic primary when
yeah, now they're on to the Democrats.
Digress.
Yeah, no, well, so let me just talk.
Not a great argument, but he's right. Tucker's platforming him. He's not platforming Tucker. Entirely true. Entirely true. I'm not even as pissed off about Glenn Greenwald's 11 Tucker Carlson segments for pay outside of just laughing at it and mocking it. But sure, Tucker Carlson is platforming Glenn Greenwald because Glenn Greenwald wants to talk about certain topics and promote his book. Fine. Glenn Greenwald, as you've now just seen in this interview, is also running PR for Tucker Carlson. That's the insidious part. Everyone is constantly calling out Glenn Greenwald on Twitter, being like, hey, Glenn, you always, shots fired. You're always going after all these, media outlets saying that CNN are hacks, MSNBC are hacks. We agree with you. But what about Fox News? You rarely criticize Fox News anymore. In fact, you barely do it. And you certainly don't criticize the white supremacist power hour, Tucker Carlson. How much evidence do you need, Glenn, at this point? It's like, it's overwhelming. If the dog whistles don't do anything for you, if the numerous clips don't do anything for you, if his history, by the way, on like the Bubba the Love Sponge or whatever show and all the things he was saying on there don't do anything for you, one of his head writers was fired because it got outed that he was a neo-Nazi. Yeah. Did everyone forget that thing that happened? That one of Tucker Carlson's head writers was a neo-Nazi and got fired when that got exposed? That's kind of telling, isn't it? In addition to everything else? Like, okay. What more do you need?
This will come down to who can deliver the lower propensity and mid propensity voters.
To our gods, Xander Corvus and Peyton L. Just, we will build a ladder to heaven to deliver you the daily news. To our monarch, Tom Spiker, we are your most humble of clownish jesters. To our lords, Trevor R. and Alexander Thaler, you have our undying fealty. To our knights of the round table, Nate, that one guy, Hagbird Celine, Matthew Scarborough, Stellar Vision, Ariana McCarthy, Daniel Sutton, Ants Are Still Running the World, Coulter Smith, Tom Groh, Val 9000, Jenna Tal, Quiet 185, Anna Loves Riley, Riley and Anna, Omni, Poodlehawk, The Tim Caucus, Multimondi, Trevor Janis, Lemmy 101, Anthropophojack, Saren 42, Chronic to Hemphog, Catherine, Radical Maniac, Ramon Acosta, Incosin, Violent Orchard, Sophie Baby, Political Puppy, Andreas Chiringuito, Zach Christensen, Josh Mickelson, Todd Buckingham, and Todd Lajeunesse. We shall meet you in the tavern, and we raise a drink, and we salute you.